This week on Young Rock, two men.
Hopkins, this is your new partner, Dwayne Johnson.
Look out for each other.
Many phones.
You guys better hope those phones are working. Amanda Chavez is checking your work, and if anything's off, we're all screwed.
One mission.
You need to get to those phones before Amanda Chavez does.
My football career, my life is on the line.
I'm saving up for Sega Genesis.
Johnson and Hopkins.
If you're messing with my chances to get to the NFL, I will kill you.
You can't risk it. Do not screw this up! Hopkins!
Phone steam ahead. We're talking Young Rock Season 1, Episode 7 on Pro Wrestling Repackaged. Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Chris.
And my name is Tessa.
And this is Pro Wrestling Repackaged, where the squared circle meets the small screen. This week, we're discussing Season 1, Episode 7 of Young Rock, Johnson and Hopkins. But before we dive in, just wanted to quickly mention something that Podchaser.com is doing. If you're not familiar with Podchaser, it's a great platform for podcast discovery. It's almost like the IMDb of podcasts. You can really find exactly what you're looking for on there if you're looking for something very specific. And you can also add credits if you've guested on a show, if you host a show, if you edit a show, you can add your credits. So it's kind of like the IMDb of podcasts. But what Podchaser is doing this month for April is they're donating money to Meals on Wheels America for every podcast or episode review that is left on their platform. And they're also doubling the donation whenever a podcaster replies to your review that you've left. So we definitely encourage you to leave your favorite podcast a review on Podchaser. If you do leave us one, we will very much appreciate it, and we will also reply to it so that we can double the donations. So check out podchaser.com for more on that, but definitely wanted to make mention of that because it's a great cause. Meals on Wheels America, that's going on now through the month of April. So if you do that, thank you very much in advance. We really appreciate it, and I'm sure that the people who are receiving the Meals on Wheels will also appreciate it. And with that, let's jump right into this week's edition of The Rock Says.
The Rock says, The Rock says.
What's The Rock saying?
Tessa, what was your favorite quote from this episode this week?
So I think we chose quotes that occurred during around the same time in this episode.
Wait a minute. How do you know what I chose?
I have your notes. We share a document.
We really need to add more of an element of mystery here.
So my quote comes from when Dwayne is trying to save his job and in turn save his football career by fixing an emergency phone. He says, "Wait, what's the terminal strip? Isn't that the shady strip club by the airport?" I just like that.
Okay.
It just made me laugh. I thought this was a whole funny scene.
It was. And it's weird out of context, too, now that I hear it.
It's all weird out of context.
It's all weird. It's all weird in context, too.
That's true.
That's a good one, though. He got some good little one-liners this episode. Usually the Dwayne character doesn't get as many of those. But there's such a little Rocky Johnson in this episode that I guess they had to give him to someone.
He didn't have a chance. Rocky did not have a chance.
No. Well, mine is kind of along the same lines. Mine is when he runs up to the person in the golf cart and says, "Phone services, I'm commandeering this cart." And it's, now that I think about it, it's not so much about the quote itself, it's just about the energy.
I think it's the whole action.
The forceful nature in which he did it, and the fact that no one has ever said that sentence ever before.
He's acting like he's like some cop
or
something. And
this is one of the things that I choose to believe that he really did this and this really happened exactly like this. I'm choosing to believe it because I want to. So that was this week's edition of The Rock Says. Always a good time. And that brings us to our surgical dissection of this episode. Season 1, Episode 7. I don't know what I was doing there. Season 1, Episode 7 of Young Rock, Johnson and Hopkins, directed by Jeffrey Walker, written by Eric Durbin. Tessa, why don't you give us a little bit of a summary? You know what? Do I boss you around a lot on this podcast?
You tell me to do things.
If you want to, you can give a summary of this episode. If not, then I guess we'll just sit here awkwardly.
I will give the summary.
Thank you very much.
In this episode, we're in 1991, And Dwayne is still on academic probation, which we saw in the last college episode. To prove that he cares about the University of Miami beyond just football, Dwayne gets a job, well, really it's a volunteer position, checking the emergency phones. But really, he's just watching action movies with his new friend and coworker, Hopkins. The two get to live out their buddy action film dreams when they have to race to actually do their job. Meanwhile, Leah returns from Samoa and must make amends with her family and friends.
And that is the most meanwhile of meanwhile. That's about as meanwhile as you can get this episode. I feel like it was
very brief.
Yeah, a little bit out of place, I would almost say. Had almost nothing to do with anything else. That's not to say that each episode needs to be like a Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm dovetail at the end where they intertwine, but yeah, it kind of felt like an afterthought towards the end, but we will get into all of that. Overall thoughts of this episode, I would say that the first thing that jumps out is how much of a love letter to action movies and action heroes this was, and I don't think that's any kind of accident at all. I mean, The Rock did mention on social media, I don't know if you saw this, that he looked up to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone growing up, and they were his heroes growing up. So it is very fitting for him to pay tribute to some of the actors that laid the groundwork for the type of movie star that he would eventually become and just kind of the type of figure in pop culture that he would eventually become. So I thought that it was very appropriate. And after I watched it the second time, it really kind of clicked in my mind just kind of how bizarre it must have been for The Rock to grow up watching Arnold and Sly and then be one of their successors in a way.
So I'm not really familiar with action movies, but I felt like the way they presented all of that in this episode was really great. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really funny, but it's such a different vibe from the last college episode. So it's kind of weird, but I think this era is still my favorite young Rock time period.
You're right. It is a very big tonal shift from the last 90s episode, and that's not to say it's a bad thing, but it was a little bit jarring. I had a preconceived notion of what this might be going in just based on the last 90s episode, but at this point, I think with each time period kind of establishing its own vibe, it's just a little bit weird to all of a sudden, oh, now we're doing the wacky thing here.
Right.
I more associate the wackiness with 87 in a way. Not what I was expecting. I will say, though, Uli killed it.
Yes.
His performance yet again, I think, is incredible. And I think what we are witnessing here is like the very, very early chapter, the first act of a guy who's going to go on to do a lot of great things because he is really, really good. Not only in capturing, I think, The Rock physically, from a physical presence standpoint, but also just some of his vocal tics as well. Just some of his cadence and the way he said some things in this episode. I was like, damn, he's really got it. And for a guy who's never met The Rock in person at this point, only over Zoom, again, my hat's off to Uli. He's really quite the star of this show, I think.
He really has the mannerisms down. You know, you said just the way he speaks, but he was really given that people's eyebrow a lot in this episode. And it was just very Rock-like.
And also the other actors, Adrian and Bradley, they're all really good. It's a very well-cast show. We say it a lot, but it's true. It's one of the strongest things about this show.
Here's what might make a difference in how we perceive Uli's portrayal of The Rock. That's closer to a time period where we know The Rock. We don't know, 15-year-old Dwayne or 10-year-old Dewey, but we're getting really close to when we would actually know how he acts.
Yeah, that this is kind of more of the guy that we know.
Right.
With the charisma that we know. So that's a great point. We don't necessarily know what a 10-year-old or 15-year-old Dwayne Johnson, aside from the few pictures we have seen, we don't really know much about that aside from what we've gotten from this show. But, we do know that the guy who was playing college football was probably not too far off from the guy who eventually showed up at Survivor Series 96. So that's a very good point. So Uli, again, just heaping all the praise on him because I thought that he was really good in this episode. I really did have a lot of fun with this episode. So anything that I do say, that's a criticism of some of the content of this episode, I do not want anyone to misconstrue that as I hated it, because I love this episode. This is up there, I think, for me.
Right.
It's one of my favorites. I had a really good time with it.
The bulk of the episode is really good because the bulk of the episode is the 1991 at the University of Miami. And I think that stuff in this episode is gold. Everything else, maybe a little lackluster.
Speaking of which, let's start off, as we always do, in 2032. What's not lackluster is the return of the Rock and Randall connection, because it is back in full effect. So already starting off on a positive note here.
I love Randall. I say this every single time, but I just love Randall.
He takes the smallest moment in those segments that we get with him, and he manages to make it one of the funniest things in the entire episode. And I think that there's something to be said for that. And I also think that we really do need Randall here to make sense of any of this, because he is our guide. He is our surrogate in that aspect. He is the one who is like extracting this information out of the Rock in a way that we really need him to, because when it's just the Rock on his own or talking with someone else or giving a press conference, it's kind of muddled. So Randall is very necessary.
It just isn't as good without Randall.
Those scenes are nowhere near as fun without Randall. I think he really does add so much. But along with those fun aspects of 2032, there are also some things that we're less than thrilled with. And we mentioned this a little bit last episode, but the General Monica Jackson story / character, whatever. And this whole idea that the Rock's pick for vice president is just being met with this criticism and backlash. And the argument that she's not credible as a vice president, which, first of all, does that mean that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is credible as president in this reality?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, we still don't know. We've said this before. We do not know who the actual president is. We don't know who he's running against. So maybe we are just living in a world where celebrities are the credible ones. Politicians aren't credible anymore.
Well, that's true. And, I was thinking about this as I was editing last week's episode, and just why those at that press conference didn't seem to push back or question The Rock at all or give any kind of resistance and basically not really seem to act like real journalists. And I thought about it, and, if Randall Park is an actor turned journalist, then what's to say that the rest of those journalists weren't also actors turned journalists? What if they're all just a bunch of former actors and they're so enamored with The Rock being this gigantic star that they're not doing their actual jobs?
They're probably all writing, puff pieces about him. Just these, he's so great, we love him, he's one of us.
What if Hollywood has taken over politics by 2032?
I mean, some people seem to think that that's a good idea.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can start with all those people who voted for Ronald Reagan.
Sure. Anytime there is a celebrity that has the same political views as one person, they're like, this person is great. They need to run for mayor or governor or whatever. Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes, the governator. But, more than anything, I think I'm just actually tired of talking about The Rock running for president. I don't think it's funny.
It's not. It's the worst part of every episode, I think, especially given the frame narrative here isn't working. They don't relate well to what's going on in the past eras. It's weak. It's really weak. Unless Randall is there, then it's okay.
I mean, I wouldn't trade Randall for anything, but sometimes I just wish, why couldn't this just be The Rock just telling a story to his kids? Mm-hmm. How I Met Your Waffle.
We don't need the Dwayne Johnson running for president angle. It's not really necessary.
Yeah. I think it's just time we came out and said it. It's the weakest part of the show, and I just don't really care. I just want to see the old stuff. I want to see the flashbacks. That's what I'm here for. The show could literally just be The Rock narrating it Wonder Years style. It basically is that. Anyway, just do that. I don't know why it has to have this political spin. I don't know.
Well,
I'm not a writer, so.
Well, you could have the frame narrative setting up these other stories. It's a good technique to have, but it's just not working in this way. You could have him doing a retrospective interview on his career, on his life, or something like that. It doesn't need to be, here's The Rock running for president.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Randall trying to leave mid-interview with these 2032 scenes. Like, all right, yeah, we're done. Oh, no, here we go. More. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's a popular opinion or not. I don't know if there is a popular opinion about this show currently at the moment. But yeah, 2032 not lighting our world on fire. But the idea that Monica Jackson is this unfit pick for VP while The Rock somehow is, it's just not, I don't know. And her embarrassing puns at the end, power to the pebble. It's like, okay, yeah, it's cute. But I had much higher hopes for Rosario Dawson's involvement in this show. So there is a tinge of disappointment there just with that.
I thought maybe given the fact that she's a general, she would kind of be the serious one here. And The Rock would just be the humor. So putting her in this just comic relief role seems very bizarre.
There's a level of satire here that I totally, I pick up on. I don't know, maybe it's just not my thing. Doesn't really work for me in this context.
Just have him sit down with Randall and talk about his life.
Yeah.
You don't need the political aspect.
Sure, yeah. I know, I agree with that. And again, I feel like sometimes we're too much in lockstep with our opinions on some of these things in the show, and there's not enough conflict, not enough drama. So, Tessa, I'm actually going to reveal that I completely disagree with everything that you have said up until this point, and I've been lying just to placate you.
Wow.
How do you feel about that?
That's rude.
Yeah.
That's really rude.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Well, the truth hurts. The truth hurts. What can I say? But seriously, in all seriousness, along with these 2032 segments, always comes the often tenuous connection to the main story of the episode. And this week that was, I don't leave my partners behind. Hopkins taught me that one, which then led us to actually a pretty funny moment of Randall just repeatedly saying Hopkins in funny ways, which was a delight. And again, I wouldn't trade Randall for anything.
Stealing the show, as usual.
But that does bring us to the meat of this episode. In 1991, Miami, Florida, college Dwayne at the University of Miami, doing the bench presses, doing the practices, doing the scrimmages, doing all of that. But what he's not doing, apparently, is his homework.
Yeah, so at this point, football, it's going great. He's doing fantastic. But then the grades, the coach calls him out and shows that he's getting all D's except for one C. He is average in, I believe, U.S. history, but everything else D's across the board. And in The Rock's book, he this is true. He was on academic probation, and he says that for all of his classes, he would have to go up at the end of class and say to the professor, "Sir, I think I'm mature and fairly responsible, although I know that my acts haven't shown it in the last few months. Could you please sign this note saying I was in class so that I can work out this afternoon?" After every single class.
What a college athlete.
So, he's going to class, but he's doing horribly. And he has to prove that he cares about the school and not just football.
I don't understand the reasoning of this. I don't think that proves anything, being forced to volunteer. I don't think that proves that you care about the school. I think it just proves that you'll do whatever you have to do to play football. So I guess it makes sense as a setup for the episode, but if this really happened in real life, it's kind of a weak punishment.
It's also kind of a condemnation of the college system. It's all about appearances. It doesn't really matter what your grades are. You can stay on the football team as long as you
pretend to care about the college, which... if you're a college football player, you were basically just brought there to play on the team, which then lends credence to Leah's stance that, oh no, he should be paid.
Yeah, I mean, they're the ones who are bringing the money into the college, really. So
let's just call it what it is.
Pay them.
Speaking of Leah, though, let's talk about her right now because she's out of exile in Samoa. She is back in the United States, and she has come to Florida.
College football player / bad student Dwayne has somehow found a loophole in the U.S. law that allows Leah to return to the country.
You know what? Now that we think about this, I guess the presidential run really does make sense.
I just like, what loophole? Why does he say this? Why does he think this would be a good look for him as a presidential candidate? He's taking advantage and finding loopholes in the system to benefit his own family. That doesn't look good. And he won't answer questions about it.
I don't know. Sounds like a politician to me.
I mean, yes, but...
So Leah is back in Florida, and I have to say, this story, by the time they cut to that beach barbecue scene later on in the episode, I forgot that she was even part of this episode. This felt very shoehorned in, and especially with all the action happening, to cut back to Leah's story, which not only has nothing to do, but also kind of undercuts a lot of the tension and just brings it back to something that almost feels a little too early to be happening. It felt like a lot of resolution happening in that scene, and that felt like a scene that maybe should have actually been in a later episode, maybe the season finale. How do we go back to the 1982 storyline after seeing this kind of resolution that happens between Leah and JYD and the kind of her reckoning with the fact that she feels like a failure to her family and things like that? Where does that leave us now for the episodes in the past with Leah's story?
Given the last episode, I really did not like how they did this. You know, nearly a decade has passed since what we just saw last week when she screwed Rocky. And we have no idea what's happened between then and 1991, but it's suddenly resolved. We saw no aftermath of any of that. And it just felt really weird. It felt out of place. What has she done that she feels like she needs to be forgiven for? It didn't work for me.
I guess it could be the screw job that we saw last week.
Which isn't referenced here at all.
And again, I'm not a writer. They probably have much more up their sleeve for that particular story, but this kind of just felt a little bit out of place. It felt like, oh, this is a bit premature to be seeing a scene like this. This kind of felt like, a season finale type of scene, but it just felt a little bit jarring to all of a sudden be having Leah's story kind of come to a head like this in the middle of an episode that it really didn't even need to be a part of.
No, I feel like there could have been some other focus on his family. This just felt wildly out of place. And really, we're watching something get resolved and we don't really know what needed to be resolved.
That's not to say that I didn't love that beach barbecue scene with the wrestlers. That was one of the highlights for me. Anytime we get that group together, it's always a highlight. And, in particular, I liked kind of the references and Easter eggs to Macho Man's Slim Jim endorsement, where he doesn't say Slim Jims, but he says he just has to eat a lot of sticks of beef jerky and things like that. That's always fun. That's the wrestling stuff. That's the stuff that I came here for. So I did love that scene. And if they just want to have a beach barbecue with wrestlers in every episode, I'd probably be okay with it. But it did feel a little bit like, okay, it's nonlinear storytelling, I guess. But you keep saying that the framing device that they're using for this episode isn't working. And I feel a lot of times that the jumping around and we reveal a little bit about this, but then we go back, and then we get more about this, and then we go back again. And it's just a little bit like, okay, trying to keep the story straight at times has been, for a sitcom, for a 20-minute sitcom, I feel like it's doing maybe just a little bit too much and getting a little bit too cute with the format here.
Yeah, that type of storytelling belongs in another genre, I think. We have such limited time with these characters every week. Why waste it going back and forth like this and kind of jumbling up everything?
But again, I'm not a TV writer. I don't necessarily know what's best for this show. Maybe by the end of the season, we'll be like, okay, now that everything's out on the table and we've examined everything, maybe it will all kind of come together and make sense in a way that we didn't see when we're kind of in the middle of it right here.
Well, by then you can just watch every 1982 episode in order, every 1987 episode in order, every 1990 episode in order, and then get the full picture.
Right. Yeah, you kind of can watch them in production order because that's how they did. They blocked out 82 episodes, 87 episodes, 90 and 91 episodes, and that's how they shot in that order. So that might be an interesting experiment. It's kind of like if you watch the Marvel Cinematic Universe in chronological order as opposed to the release date order. So perhaps that is something that we do explore in the post-season. But now we bring you our feature presentation, Johnson and Hopkins. I guess the main reference being Hobbs and Shaw in this case with The Rock, but blank and blank being a big trope in the kind of buddy cop detective subgenre of action films. I did enjoy that. I kind of had a sense that that might be where they were going when I saw just the episode title for this week, but I was not disappointed. I have to say, this was some of the most fun I think I've had with this show thus far, which is saying something because last week we got my favorite scene, my favorite thing to ever happen in this show with the Island Battle Royal, but this is up there for me. And I think by the end of the season, this will be one of my ultimate highlights of Johnson and Hopkins and everything that came with this, from the montage of them watching action movies to them being in their own very low stakes action movie. I shouldn't say low stakes. There was a Sega Genesis on the line here, but not to mention a football career.
But we really know what's important here.
Oh, sure. Hopkins getting that Sega Genesis is I was living and breathing for that throughout this entire portion of the episode. But let's start at the meeting of Johnson and Hopkins, this dynamic duo, their first meeting.
So this is where we get into the real meat, or the beyond meat of this episode, where Dwayne gets a job working for phone services, which means he has to check emergency phones on campus to make sure they're working. And he's kind of passed on over to Hopkins, who is a senior and is supposed to show him the ropes. But this is where they just end up watching action movies instead. He says nobody checks the phone. Nobody really checks the phones. Nobody's going to check up on the work. We just say we did, and then we go back and watch some movies.
Yeah, having a job where you can just kind of slack off and just do whatever, watch movies, watch TV. Yeah, you kind of look back at those times, especially if it was a college job, and you wish that life could still kind of be like that. For some people, it is.
Well, here, I don't think Dwayne's even getting paid.
Well, that's true.
It's a volunteer role. Hopkins is getting paid because, as we know, he's saving up for that Sega Genesis. But Dwayne's just worried about his football career. And he tells Hopkins, if you're messing with my chances to get into the NFL, I will kill you.
A very well-delivered line, because I believed him in that moment.
He could very easily kill Hopkins.
Again, just the overall package that Uli brings to this role is just incredible. He's very, very good. Very good in this role. But I also want to say that I really enjoyed Hopkins. I thought that he matched whatever Uli was bringing to this. He matched it. And he was the perfect sidekick, the perfect buddy cop partner for Dwayne in this episode. They're kind of like the kid and play of campus services, especially with the
hair,
with Hopkins' hair. I love it. It was so 90s. The clothes were so 90s, which of course it was 1991, so they don't have any option but to be so 90s. But again, I just had so much fun with this and this new character of Hopkins.
He's the one to welcome us into the greatest scam in college history. They just run back to the room, they don't do their job, and they fight and bond over their favorite action heroes. And you know what? We love some healthy male bonding here.
Yeah, and what they kind of did here was almost like a prototypical, like, unplugged action movie podcast that they weren't even recording, because in the reality of the show, it is very clear that these guys would be perfect podcasters.
In an alternate universe.
Yeah, in an alternate universe, The Rock is one of those wrestlers who jumped on the Podcast One bandwagon like 5-6 years ago and started doing one of those podcasts where the entire thing is just a backdrop for them to plug the Dollar Shave Club and BarkBox and Omaha
Steaks. Can't forget Omaha Steaks.
So yeah, in the alternate reality where The Rock is on that level and doing that, I could totally see him bringing in Hopkins to be his kind of buddy co-host.
They'd just talk about their football pool.
Oh, it'd be great. He should still do this, by the way.
The Rock should do a podcast.
Oh my God, he should. He does everything, literally everything else that you could possibly do.
Maybe we shouldn't give him any ideas.
Yeah, that's true. We think we want it, but then again, he surprises us in many ways. I don't know. But I really loved the interplay between Hopkins and The Rock. And again, it's a character we've known for 20 minutes, less than 20 minutes, and already he's one of my favorite characters that we've been introduced to in this show. So I really do hope that this was all rooted in an actual person that The
Right.
Rock actually knew, because if not, then, it's a great character for the show, but I'm just a little disappointed if this wasn't a real friend that he had in college.
I don't want them just creating fake people.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be gutted if we found out that Waffle wasn't real.
Waffle has to be real.
Yeah. But one other aspect of this kind of budding friendship between Hopkins and Dwayne that I really loved was I'll just sit down with, like, my friend Tim, for example. We'll just sit down and just talk about movies, and all of a sudden 4 hours have passed and we didn't even realize it. And they have that type of friendship here. I did love the debate, Arnold versus Sylvester Stallone. I love that because, first of all, there's no wrong answer. They're both great. I came to action movies a lot later than I'm sure a lot of other people did in their lives. And really, my friend Tim was the one who introduced me to a lot of the more renowned action movies. Again, we've touched on this before. I was always more in kind of the wholesome content type of kid, My movies of choice were Back to the Future and Bugsy Malone. So I wasn't really big on action movies until I became friends with my friend Tim, and he really introduced me to a lot of Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. But also a little bit later in life than most people, I also fell in love with the Rocky movies. And I have watched the first Rambo movie, First Blood. I have watched that. So I do feel that I'm a little bit educated, when it comes to this debate of Arnold versus Sly. But they're both just the quintessential action hero, I feel like, for this era of film. And the fact that The Rock is the guy who kind of is their successor at this point, it just made me enjoy this portion of the episode that much more, with this debate of Arnold versus Sly, and then the action movie montage, which was just fun as hell, with Stan Bush's The Touch playing over it. It was just, it was classic. It was just very well done.
So you don't have a strong opinion either way on who's better?
No, you know what? Because I genuinely love the Rocky movies. They're some of my favorite movies I've ever seen. And I really love Sylvester Stallone in those. I haven't seen many of his other movies, but I just think about all the Arnold movies that I've seen over the years and enjoyed, just on basic principle that it's Arnold. And like you've seen a few. I've made you watch Jingle All the Way more than a few times in the holiday season. I've shown you Kindergarten Cop.
I still want to see that movie where he plays a pregnant man.
No.
That's the one I want to see.
Oh boy, all right, maybe at some point. But yeah, no, I don't take a side in these debates, partly because I like them both and I don't feel the need to be territorial about it, and partly because I just don't do those types of, probably not great for me as someone who likes to do podcasts, but I really don't like debating about what's better, this or this. And, at this point in society, aren't we past pitting two muscled up guys against each other?
No, absolutely not.
Well then, tell me though, before we move on, do you have an opinion on Arnold versus Sly?
Absolutely not.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that very measured response. That's what they have come to expect from us here on this podcast. But let's move into the action phase of this episode, the action scenes, which were, in my opinion, very well shot, very well edited, and very well scored. The fact that I got into this the same way I would in, say, an Arnold movie, for example, I think that says a lot here, because the stakes were not exactly high.
But this is where we get the real conflict of this episode. Yes, Johnson and Hopkins have been reporting that all emergency phones are in working order. No, they have absolutely not checked one single phone. So here we have Amanda Chavez. She's from HQ. She comes to do quality control, to check every phone to make sure they're working and to ensure that Johnson and Hopkins, the great duo that they are, have been doing their job. But they haven't.
Of course they haven't. Of course they haven't.
So they need to get to all of those phones before she does. And God help us if she's wearing her comfortable shoes.
Her comfortable heels. Along with just loving how this was all presented from a visual standpoint and the score, some of the action movie dialogue, tropey dialogue that we got here, spot on. and little bits like the remote control helicopter as Hopkins is hanging over that ledge that was like an inch off the ground as he was hanging, and all of a sudden this remote control helicopter comes, and the way it's framed, it kind of looks like it is an actual helicopter. Yeah. Brilliant, just brilliant stuff. This was some of the best comedy I think we've gotten out of this show in these action scene sequences. But I think bigger than that, it's really kind of just the fact that Johnson and Hopkins, their friendship is based around these action movies, these big explosions and these big action scenes, and Arnold saves the day and Sly saves the day and whoever saves the day, and now they get to save the day.
Yeah, they really get to live out their action hero dreams here. You know, even in dealing with a loose cannon like Amanda Chavez. So Johnson and Hopkins, they're redirecting band practice. They're busting into classrooms. You even get a slow motion bike attack here on Hopkins.
Yeah, he gets injured here. And, this really tugs at the heartstrings.
Oh, yeah. When Dwayne has to pick him up and is running with him, cradled in his arms. It's really it's an emotional scene.
Yeah, I love the exchange of, you need this job for football, and you need that Sega Genesis.
He is not leaving that man behind.
Oh, there was just so much good stuff in this part of the episode that it feels kind of silly trying to recap it and break it down. If you're listening to us, presumably you've seen the episode. If not, then sorry for the spoilers, I guess. But it's really just the kind of thing that you have to watch to really extract the comedy out of. But there were so many great lines. And like I mentioned in The Rock Says, phone services, I'm commandeering this cart. And just all of the kind of inane stunts and just goofy one-liners and tropey action movie dialogue and situations, and the way it was presented and scored, I was there for all of this. I was right there with them. So it could have easily been the type of thing where we're like, okay, yeah, we're doing this. Oh yeah, I get it. Yeah, and then they're gonna do this, and then they're gonna save the day, and but it was so much more just seeing it acted out. And again, a great performance.
Look, this is serious stuff. This is high drama. They get to a point they've checked what they believe to be the last phone, but there's a whole other one on the complete opposite side of campus. They have to get to it. This is phone steam ahead. They need to get there to check this phone before her.
Just the beads of sweat just on Dwayne's forehead.
When he has just seconds to spare, Chavez is drinking that coffee. The phone, that emergency phone isn't working. He is sweating.
Yeah, he's putting those wires in, and you just cross your fingers and just gotta hope. It's like, no, Dwayne, test it before she does. Test it.
We don't have time for that.
We don't have time for it.
It's like there's gonna be an explosion.
Yeah.
If this phone doesn't work.
Played. That's completely the way it's played. It's played completely. They lean into it, and Uli leaned into it. And again, our man on the phone, what was his name?
I have no idea.
Our man on the phone guiding us through the drama of fixing this payphone.
But then you have to ask, what does this have to do with General Monica Jackson?
Well, it's The Rock saying that he doesn't leave his partners behind, and just like he picked up Hopkins, I almost called him Hobbs. Just like he picked up Hopkins and he got him through the rest of this mission that they were on, he's going to pick up General Monica Jackson and get her through their mission to become president and vice president. As the words come out of my mouth, it just sounds so stupid.
This message, sticking by your people, picking them up, making sure no man is left behind. It feels like that message could have felt more appropriate in 1982 with Rocky and Leah, and him choosing her and sticking by her that whole time. I felt like that connection could have been stronger.
All that being said, when we got back to the 2032, right after the thrill of victory, and we're standing and cheering and screaming, yes! Just like our man on the phone. Then we go back to 2032, and I'm just like, oh, all right.
Randall's here. That's good.
But still, yeah, and I hate to be negative on it because that's not totally not what I like to put out into the world on podcasts. I don't like that because I don't really like to listen to that often, unless I know that it's coming from a good place. And I don't know, 2032 thus far into the season, Randall aside, and I really do mean that, hasn't totally been working for me. And I will extend kind of the benefit of the doubt until we have seen the rest of the episodes. I believe we have about 4 more to go. So we'll see what they do. I'm curious. It's not the thing that I come to this show excited about, but I am curious to see where it all kind of winds up because I'm still a little bit puzzled with the Monica Jackson character.
I hope there's a good payoff. With how much we've seen so far, I'm just, disappointed with that stuff.
Before we wrap it up, I did mention one of the needle drops, that being Stan Bush, The Touch. But there were a few others that I wanted to mention. Early on, during the weight room scene at the University of Miami, we had Miami Bass by Stetsasonic. We had Axel F., the classic jam from Beverly Hills Cop, while they're tailing Amanda Chavez. Axel F. by Harold Faltermeyer. I never knew who that was by, and now I know. Quite a name. And of course, you can't have an action movie reference tribute without having a song like Bonnie Tyler Holding Out for a Hero during the scene where Johnson and Hopkins are checking the phones. And it's, again, bravo on the needle drops this episode.
That last one is pretty much the only one that I immediately recognized in this whole
You didn't recognize
episode.
Axel F?
I don't think so. Not offhand, no.
I mean, I'll be honest, I've never seen Beverly Hills Cop, but I just know that song just from being alive this long. So, yeah, that's a good one. So, whoever's in charge of the needle drop selection, my hat's off because it's always just that extra little bit of salt and pepper that we need in these episodes that really bring it home for whatever time period we're in. That's going to bring us to a close, and that will do it for this episode of Pro Wrestling Repackaged. Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate it, and we hope you will join us next time as we discuss Season 1, Episode 8 of Young Rock.
Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at PWRepackaged and email us at pwrepackaged@gmail.com.
Subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. And visit pwrepackaged.crd.co for links to everything.
If you'd like to support the show, please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or any other platform that features reviews.
Pro Wrestling Repackaged is a Multitrack Minds production. Visit multitrackminds.com for projects and audio production services by yours truly.